Welcome to the Bluestocking Circle podcast, Lady Nerds on Popular Culture. We're your hosts, Ashley,
B, and Griselle.
This is episode 12, The Flash. In this episode, we'll be discussing the first season of the CW TV show The Flash, so before we get started, you should be warned, this episode is unapologetically rife with spoilers for that entire season. The Flash is an American superhero television series airing on the CW. It follows Barry Allen, portrayed by Grant Gustin, a crime scene investigator who gains superhuman speed, which he uses to fight criminals, including others who have also gained superhuman abilities. Gustin's Allen appeared at first on Arrow, another CW superhero show, and the positive reception to his fun and likable Flash led to the development of a full pilot to make use of a larger budget and to help flesh out Barry's world in more detail. The Flash premiered in North America on October 7, 2014. Where the pilot became the second most watched premiere in the history of the CW. Currently, the 5th season of The Flash is set to premiere in October 2018. And because we here at the Bluestocking Circle like research and we like to be well-rounded, a little information on the comic version of the character. The Flash has had his origin story retold differently several times over his many years of publication. The original Flash, a college student named Jay Garrick, was created by Gardner Fox and Harry Lampert and first appeared in Flash Comics #1, published in 1940. Barry Allen as the Flash first appeared in October 1956 in Showcase #4, created by Robert Kanigher and Carmine Infantino. There have been at least 2 other characters who have become the Flash, Wally West and Bart Allen, and all incarnations of the Flash possess super speed. And with that, our newbie is now going to give a synopsis of the Flash as she knows it. B?
Young Barry Allen witnesses the murder of his mother, miraculously not named Martha, at the hands of a mysterious man in lightning. After his father is blamed for the murder, Barry is taken in by his best friend's family, the Wests, and develops both a fascination for all things weird and a weird infatuation on his new surrogate sister, Iris. Years later, all grown up but still adorable, Barry works as a forensic scientist for the Central City Police Department. One night, thanks to a very comic book combination of particle accelerators, chemicals, and lightning, he becomes the fastest man alive. Now Barry is on a mission to prove his father's innocence and catch his fellow metahumans while moonlighting as the superhero known as the Flash.
I think you could moonlight as the episode writer for these things, because that sounds perfect.
Thank you.
And now we will zoom into our origin stories. My origin story is very specific to this show, as I don't actually know anything about the Flash other than what I've seen in the show and what I've gleaned from various Wikipedia article reading. My younger brother was really excited about the upcoming show back in 2014. It looked interesting to me because Jesse L. Martin was going to be in it, and I loved him in Rent. Judge me if you will, that's perfectly acceptable. My brother and I watched the first episode together, and then for the rest of the fall, I would speed home from my evening class, which ended at 7:40, just so I could be on the couch and ready when the show began at 8.
So I know the Flash from his interactions with Batman and the Justice League, obviously. I also know enough of his backstory to know where he fits into the pantheon of DC heroes, and I know that he causes all manner of timeline confusion on a semi-regular basis, disrupting the universe overall whenever DC wants a reboot. Other than that, I haven't really followed his story, and only knew of the show through association to the nerd in my life.
Can I just say, the whole timeline thing happens in later seasons of the show, and it was one of the reasons why I stopped watching it. It's very confusing. They go back and things change, and it's hard for me to remember what's happening on a week-to-week basis in this timeline, let alone 20
all the
of
others.
Them. Yes.
Like Griselle, I know about the Flash because he appears in stories I read and watch for another hero, namely Superman. I'm guessing the first time I saw the Flash was in the Superman the Animated Series episode Speed Demons, but I have no memories of watching that as a child. The first time I remember seeing him was in a Season 4 episode of Smallville called Run, back when it aired, in which Clark Kent met Bart Allen, who Wikipedia tells me is better known as Impulse or Kid Flash rather than Full Flash in the comics, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway, I thought he was adorable, and a few years later the Wally West version of the character became one of my favorite characters in the Justice League animated series, which I first watched in college because we didn't have cable when I was growing up. I liked the character enough at the time to buy the old 1990 series on DVD, which also featured the Barry Allen version like this show does, as well as Dr. Tina McGee. But I didn't care for that show, so I didn't seek out any more Flash content after that. And as I said in First Impressions, I only knew of this specific version of the Flash from the Supergirl crossovers.
I have a question for B, especially since you mentioned Superman. Vanity Fair once described Iris, which we will talk about in detail later, I'm sure, as a Lois Lane character, with her, and I quote, journalism job, clandestine rooftop meetings with a mysterious crime fighter, and general cluelessness about his nerdy alter ego. Of course, when I read that, I thought of you. Do you think that's accurate?
Lois has inspired countless numbers of comic book women, both in profession, like Vicky Vale, and in the whole love triangle for Two thing, which is pretty much every love interest in the genre ever. I'm not familiar with Iris's history, but I wouldn't doubt Lois influenced her as well. Every journalist covering a superhero is walking in Lois's shoes, in my opinion. That being said, this particular version of Iris really needs to get her career together if she wants to be Lois Lane.
That's fair. I totally agree.
I agree.
I have a question for you. Did you catch the Superman 1978 reference in the show, now that you've seen that movie?
The taking the train bit, right? Where he
Yes.
says taking the train is still the most statistically safe way to travel, and Felicity's like, no, I thought that was airplanes, right?
That's it. That exchange was a Superman 1978 allusion.
I totally got that. This time, I did not get it the first time. And now, time for Ship Wars. Clearly, the show is setting up Barry and Iris as the big romance, the one we all should be rooting for. I've done some research. Thank you, Wikipedia. How did I exist without you? And Barry and Iris are married mostly, from what I can tell, in the comics. So, canonically, their relationship is endgame. Did you guys feel it? And I ask because I personally found it very weird that Barry was in love with Iris, given that they grew up as siblings.
So I knew the history behind it, and I also found it weirdly awkward as depicted in the show. There's a lot of pining on Barry's part.
So much pining.
So much pining. And I saw a few extra episodes, the pining continued. But it's hard to believe that someone can't get over the girl they had a crush on when they were 11. No one ever made you feel warm inside in all those years? Especially when you were raised like siblings? I don't know. I may be into romance, but even I don't care for the one and only since we were kids trope.
Not that I want to incur B's ire on me another time, but that was my issue with Chuck and Ned on Pushing Daisies. Barry does date a few other girls, including Linda Park, who's kind of an awesome no-nonsense sports reporter in the back half of the first season.
Wait, Linda Park?
Yes.
I.e. his nephew's wife?
What?
Apparently, Wikipedia says yes.
Linda Park is Wally West's wife, and Wally West is Iris West's nephew. So Wally is Barry's nephew by marriage.
Neither
I've
one...
lost track of these associations, but what?
Neither one of those relationships is accurate in the show. They change both of them. So the names are there, but the relationships are very different. So Wally and Iris are not aunts and nephew. Okay, so let me kind of defend Barry a little bit. He was not poaching his nephew-in-law's wife in the show. I never got invested, though, in Barry and Linda and Barry anyone else because I could tell he was destined to be with Iris. That was just how the show was going. When I was thinking about it, I didn't have a problem with Clark and Lois. I knew they were endgame too, but I liked watching the two of them finally make their way together in Lois and Clark. So maybe it's a problem where when I don't know each comic book history enough to properly set my expectations, that bleeds over into what I expect the show to be.
Or maybe it's because there's no Eddie in Lois and Clark, at least not in the episodes that you saw.
Barry is a homewrecker. He's trying to split these people up right from the start with his sad looks and puppy dog eyes.
It is very problematic. Barry is not a superhero when it comes to the relationships in his life. I think that's fair to say. I don't hold him up to be the ideal person to which all men should aspire to be when trying to date women. I want that on the record right now.
I hadn't really thought of the Chuck and Ned connection, but I think you're right. Whereas I could myself suspend disbelief for Chuck and Ned due to the fantasy nature of the show, the colors, the voiceover, the fairy tale narrative that it's got. I couldn't really do that for this story. It's a superhero show, but it kind of feels more like real life than Pushing Daisies does. It's also got sci-fi elements where it's like, maybe these weird things could all come together and happen by science, but Lois and Clark at least have a meet-cute, slow-burn romance, and yeah, there's no Eddie.
I did think of Ned and Chuck, and I was going to riot if I came in here today and you said you liked Barry and Iris after all the grief you gave me for Ned and Chuck. When I say that I hate romantic plots and subplots, this is exactly what I'm thinking of. The pining, the love polygons, the puppy eyes as some whiny pop song plays in the background, the fact that the show slams to a halt every 5 minutes, so some random person can comment on how much Barry loves Iris. I sprained my eyes rolling them so hard. I thought I was done with all this stuff the minute that I stopped watching Smallville. This is a very Smallville trope. Apparently the CW/WB hasn't changed in a decade and a half.
Oh, this is all, CW trope all over it.
This is very much every single CW show that I've ever watched and loved.
That's why I don't like CW or WB shows. The so-called romantic aspect of the show was tedious, and the only relationship I liked in the entire series of any kind was between Barry and Joe.
I loved Barry and Joe. And I did skip ahead, saw a few more episodes and watched the actual season finale, and they are so perfect for each other.
I love Barry and Joe, and then, spoiler alert, when Barry's father comes back into play at some point, the show does a really good job, I think, of exploring how someone would feel if he had two different fathers, both of whom loved him very much, and both of whom are father figures, but what to do, who to look up to. So they're really cute. And then I also liked Cisco and his relationship with everyone. Cisco was just the little brother of the group, and I liked having someone there who just seemed to be happy all the time. He loved coming up with names for all the supervillains, and he was always just really excited. So Cisco was fun.
I'm assuming Cisco is short for Francisco?
Yes, it is.
So I will say, a lot has changed since the Smallville days in terms of the diversity of the cast.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That was great that they're moving forward in that regard.
And that's something else too I forget if it's this season or second season, but you see more of Cisco's family, all of whom they cast appropriate characters who look and sound like someone should be, whose last name is Ramon, and whose brother and, parent to Francisco.
Can I give the trivia for this episode?
Do it.
So, because, as I said, nerd by association, did you know that the dad,
Yes.
Barry's actual dad, who was also Dawson's dad, is... Yes, he was.
That's how I knew him.
Was also the original TV Flash.
He was.
John Wesley Shipp is his name, and my brother, my nerd, made a very important point of telling me every time we watched it, hey, you realize, right? His dad is the original Flash. And I said, okay. And the next time, his dad is the original Flash. So yes, I did.
They do like to repeat that.
I was repeating it to myself every episode. I'm my own nerd. Did you also get told about the scientist, Dr. McGee, and her role?
I did not get told about the scientist.
She was the Dr. Snow, in a way, of the original Flash.
Oh, interesting.
And she's playing the exact same character she played in the 1990 series, Dr. Tina McGee.
My nerd fell down on the job. I did not
My
get
nerd told me.
So speaking of Dr. McGee, I think it is time to move into the feminist rants and talk about all the lovely women in The Flash.
I have rants. B, do you have rants?
I have a major rant.
We have so many rants.
That's why I was saying that it was tongue-in-cheek, guys. Tongue-in-cheek. Go.
Can I just say Felicity and Caitlin? Also, Iris and all the other girls? Or as I like to think of them, to put it politely, the fanboy fantasy hot nerd girl. Also, what is up with Iris and her constant need to get help from Barry to do her homework, job work, all the work at the start of the series and beyond based on my viewing?
That was driving me crazy.
Every time. It's like, are you in school? Do you not know how to do your assignments? Or your job?
And what are you? Undergrad? Grad? Dissertation?
Is she a barista? Is she a journalist? I don't know what she does. She's so confusing to me.
Maybe because the first time I was watching it, it was week to week, so some of the little details escaped me. Watching it again, yes, I did realize that it was kind of hard to tell at what stage in her academic career she was in. But in her defense, perhaps the writers were misguided when they had her say dissertation. I know that I had to write a thesis for undergrad. Maybe that's what the writers meant?
I can see the time between episodes allowing you to forget the details of it.
I agree.
When I was watching it, I just remember that in the first episode, she's a barista, then suddenly she's a journalist, and I'm like, how did that happen?
This was not a bingeable show. I found it difficult to watch one after the other, so I do think that extra week between episodes helps in that regard.
Maybe she was a barista working on the side while she was getting her degree, like Bernadette does in The Big Bang Theory. She's a Olive Garden waitress while she's getting her PhD.
There's so many things wrong with that.
I know.
Disclosure, I don't have a PhD. I'm not getting one, so I don't know the actualities of how it works.
That's not how that works. That's not how any of that works.
TV gets it wrong every time.
I was not justifying it. I was trying to perhaps give another explanation for why they got it wrong. But we can go with, they're just wrong. That's okay. But I know that's not the only rant that you guys have.
Oh, I have a major rant. And it's been building all summer long after watching Gotham by Gaslight and reading those terrible Superman Elseworlds that we talked about, as well as other superhero stories I haven't mentioned here. And this show has the same problem, which is the disposability and or interchangeability of women in superhero stories. To demonstrate what I mean with regard to The Flash specifically, and in honor of all the scientists on the show, I've brought some quantitative data. I saw 9 episodes of this series, and in the 9 episodes that I saw, there were 3 dead wives, 2 off-screen, 2 dead mothers, On screen briefly, one of who was also one of the aforementioned wives, another of who was identified as the judge, 2 missing presumed dead wives/mothers off screen, 1 dead sister off screen, 1 dead female friend on screen briefly, and 1 dead female metahuman on screen considerably. That's 9 dead women in as many episodes, 5 of who were confirmed to have been murdered by men, and 5 of whose deaths were explicitly said to have motivated their male survivors to violent actions. There was a smattering of dead men in these episodes too, but to go mixed methods for a moment, their deaths were qualitatively different in that they were mostly due to their own actions rather than by virtue of their relationships to someone else, and also they tended to die after being on screen for longer. In addition, only 3 of these episodes actually passed the Bechdel-Wallace test, the conditions of which you described back in episode 5 of this podcast. Those were episodes 5, 8, and 9. And it was egregious enough in the beginning of the series that in episode 8, Caitlin told Felicity, who's a character from another series, mind you, that, and I quote, "It is so nice having another woman to talk to." The series' 2 regular female characters didn't even speak to each other on screen until the 9th episode. And that's just in front of the camera. I did some research, and of these 9 episodes, there were 4 female writers of 12 total, and 1 female director of 7 total, plus the show was developed by 3 men. I didn't run any statistical analyses because of the small sample size, but I still feel rather confident saying these on-screen numbers are significantly terrible, yet they're normal for superhero stories. The worst part is that behind the scenes, The Flash is actually doing rather well in terms of the female-to-male writers ratio compared to other superhero works, but it's still not proportional to the population given that 1/3 instead of 1/2 of the writers are women. One recurring theme we've seen throughout our summer of superheroes is the use of dead female characters as plot devices to motivate male characters, i.e. fridging, which we've discussed at length. And as the numbers show, it was all over this series.
Hashtag don't kill women.
Don't kill women, it's not hard. After being immersed in superhero stories all summer, fridging seems to be the rule rather than the exception, and I'm so frustrated by this point, which is why I'm going on this massive endless rant. I've loved superheroes almost all my life, but this genre often seems to regard our gender as being good for little more than love interests when we're alive and martyrs when we're dead. Which brings me to my other point about The Flash. The women who were actually alive in this series had no discernible personalities that I could see in these 9 episodes. Iris changed from episode to episode depending on the whims of the plot and how the show wanted to depict Barry. One episode she's a doctoral student, like we just said, because the plot needs her dissertation to be stolen so Barry can try to rescue it. The next episode she's taking electives like an undergrad because the plot needs Barry to teach her science. Like you said, Crystal.
Yes, what was that about?
The next episode she's dating her father's partner because the plot needs Barry to be jealous. And the next episode she's a blogger because the plot needs Barry to be at odds with her, and so on and so forth. The actress is lovely and she's doing great work with what she's being given, and same with the one who's playing Caitlin, but they're not being given much by the writers, at least in what I watched. I'm nearly halfway through the first season and I still don't know anything about these characters independent of their relationship to men. Except Iris works at a coffee shop and goes to school sometimes, maybe, to study who knows what. And Caitlin is a geneticist whose childhood bully used to put gum in her hair. That's it. Compare that to how much our listeners have learned about us in approximately the same amount of time, just through passing comments we make, since we have actual personalities. And to tie that back to the data, I don't need analyses to tell me that the depiction of women in these stories on screen and on the page would change drastically for the better the second things changed behind the scenes. The Flash does seem to have more female writers than the typical superhero work, so I will commend it for that. But it's been 80 years since Superman and Lois Lane first showed up, and in general, it feels like not much has changed in the superhero genre since then. That's it. That's 4 months of frustration leaking out.
Do you feel relief now?
I do. Maybe that was my catharsis instead of my
That was
feminist
an epic
rant.
catharsis. I also found them entirely interchangeable, though, so I gotta admit, all the female characters are essentially simulacrums of each other.
Even when watching it originally, I always thought that the Iris part was the weakest aspect of the show, in part because no one knew who she was, in part because I wasn't really buying her relationship with Barry, and it's true, you only know her in her relationship with Barry, but if that's going to be a central linchpin to the show, and if you have to buy into that emotionally to care about her, I didn't think that they did that well at all. So I was always kind of watching in spite of Iris, which kind of is probably not the best thing to say about a female character, especially if there's so few on screen. I did like Caitlin. I like that they had her there at all. I feel like they very easily could have replaced her with a man, although I guess whether or not they put her in just to have the token female, especially if they don't really give her a lot of a backstory. For example, I liked that with her storyline, with the couple that were both scientists working at Star Labs when everything, exploded, it wasn't Caitlin that died, so it wasn't the female that died to trigger the male partner's, story going forward. It was the male that died.
2 differences. 1, Ronnie gets significant screen time after he's killed. So we see flashbacks of him and Caitlin and Cisco and everyone interacting. That does not happen to the vast majority of female characters who are killed off in this show. The only one that gets a flashback after her death is Flash's or Barry's mom. Second, Ronnie comes back. Ronnie's not dead. They could have made Caitlin a scientist who's there because of her love of the field. And she's traumatized by the fact that this thing exploded in front of her because the thing exploded in front of her. There is no need to have her tied up in a romantic relationship in order to motivate her. Why can't she just be there because it's science and it's her job and she feels devoted to the cause, as opposed to needing to be there and having now this tragic backstory with a dead fiancé? It makes her role tied to her relationship to a man.
Talking about like the role or not of female characters, is there anything about the fact that no matter how much writers might want to try and modernize these stories, the fact remains is that as written, especially since they were written, many decades ago, superhero stories in general just tend to have female characters either off to the side or as token female characters? Like, is there a superhero show on now that actually portrays female characters in a positive way?
Yes, and it's crossed over with this one, Supergirl.
I can't say about shows because I don't really watch that many of the superhero shows, but in the books at least, the Birds of Prey are all female characters and have gone through various incarnations, all of which have been really strong.
That's a TV show as well. I know WB show.
It was a TV show.
Agent Carter,
very
Jessica Jones.
Jessica Jones, very good.
There's nothing about this genre inherently that requires women to be sidelines.
Morals about femininity.
I'm trying to play devil's advocate and see if there's any way
to lawyer.
See if there's any way to push back. I totally agree. I'm trying to see if there's any way that we can salvage something.
Well, I didn't hate it, so there's that.
I didn't hate it either. I guess after the rampant misogyny of Gotham by Gaslight and those Elseworlds story that I was complaining about, as well as other things that I've been reading, it just all builds up. And I had hopes for The Flash. I had hopes that it was an updated version of this pretty old story. I thought they would do something more with it, something novel, and they didn't. This was a rehash of old tropes that are already worn out.
I watched a couple of episodes, maybe about half of season 2. Nothing really of season 3 or 4. I have read that the writers apparently got a lot of pushback about Iris and her relationship, so they actually finally figure out what to do with her. They give her an actual journalism job that she ends up developing on her own. We can talk about how it was that she just managed to walk in and become a journalist, a fully salaried, fully benefited employee without having any background that we know of. To be fair, though, that does happen in a lot of shows and it always annoys me. Like, you know how hard it is to get a job?
Everybody in this show. How did they get any of their jobs?
I don't understand.
Nepotism.
So possibly there's the possibility of them having developed Iris a little bit more. I will say Caitlin doesn't really have a good trajectory in front of her. She becomes part of another major storyline tied in with a man. Jay Garrick comes back, the original Flash.
Oh.
He shows up in the show, as does Wally West. Bart Allen, as far as I know, has not shown up, but that's not to say that he hasn't in an episode that I haven't seen.
Maybe they reached their Flash quota.
There are a lot of Flashes that run around, especially if you consider Reverse Flash and Zoom. And Zoom is a season 2 character, but Reverse Flash, the man in the yellow suit. There's just a lot of speedsters.
Wait, his name is literally Zoom?
There is a character whose name is Zoom. And it's actually really funny because he's very dark and threatening. Like, his suit is all brown, grays, and like his mouthpiece just kind of is grown over. So he talks about it, so it looks like he almost doesn't have a mouth. He reverberates and he talks like this, and his name is Zoom, Zoom, Zoom.
You did do a lot of research.
I also understand that this is a show in its first season, and what I saw was the first half of the first season, and there are always some growing pains with a new show. And it does look like the writers were realizing the mistakes they were making in regards to their treatment of the female characters as the episodes went on. For example, that line I quoted earlier about Caitlin saying that it's nice to have another woman to talk to. That seems like they realized that women on this show have not talked to each other for more than 5 seconds before. But again, maybe it was just a culmination of our summer of superheroes. It just really stood out to me that every episode in the beginning, the villain's motivation was always, oh, my wife died. Oh, my sister died. Oh, some woman in my life died, and that's why I'm evil. And same with the good characters. Dr. Wells' wife was dead. Obviously, the whole thing is thrown into motion because Barry's mother dies. The beginning of the show was just one endless series of dead women motivating male characters, for better or worse. But I'm ready to move on now.
So I can't argue with that. So, hanging my head in full appreciation of all the true things that have been said, we can move on to Catharsis Corner. I will start off Catharsis Corner with an anti-catharsis point. Pushing back a little bit, I totally understand all the points that we're making about women and the treatment thereof. The reason I really enjoyed this show is just its general mood and appearance. It's fun. That's kind of the best word that I have to describe it. Its consensus on Rotten Tomatoes says, and I quote, "The Flash benefits from its purposefully light atmosphere, making it a superhero show uniquely geared towards genre fans as well as novices. I came to The Flash after trying to have watched a couple of episodes of Arrow. Very dark, very gritty, very not my speed. I'm pretty sure at this point all the Christian Bale, really dark, heavy Batman movies had come out. So I was ready just to have something fun to look forward to. And I'm also ready to be scolded here, but I was reminded watching it again of Pushing Daisies.
Nope. You can't go there.
I was reminded of Pushing Daisies with its lightheartedness and its cheeriness, like I said, especially in relation to the current trend of darker and important superhero media.
I beg to differ. This is a lighthearted show and it is fun despite the rant I just went on, but it's nowhere near the whimsical levels of Pushing Daisies, or to use a current CW show for comparison, even something like Jane the Virgin.
I can't attest to Jane the Virgin. As we all know, I don't watch much animation, nor do I watch much CW. Don't try to make reason out of this. It just happens. But when I did start watching this, I kind of suspected that it would go down the route of like the Vampire Diaries or Supernatural, which I know solely through Tumblr, having never seen either of these shows. But I thought that's what I've never seen them.
How do you not see
giving me a
Supernatural?
look. I've never seen it. I mean, I know it came out. I was in like high school when it came out, and I'm still surprised that this is a thing that anybody watches. But people watch it. I don't know anything about it.
Oh, I was devoted the first 5 seasons.
Me too. They have a gift for anything. Like, you name a situation.
I know there's a gift for anything. That's why I know it through Tumblr. I had no opinion going into The Flash, but I was pleasantly surprised. It was not those things, as I feared. It was this weird, quirky, geeky boy who's pining for the girl who's maybe his sister. I don't know what that's about, but other than that, it was kind of cute.
You used the word boy.
He is a boy.
He is.
He's a child.
Can we talk about that?
We can do this.
We can talk about it.
You pointed out in the Superman episode that our physical standards for superheroes have changed a lot in the last 20 years. I'd argue that based on this show and comparing it to the 1990 Flash series or something from 1993 like Lois and Clark, our maturity standards for superheroes have changed a lot as well. Flash strikes me as being generally immature in many of the media I've seen him in, but what a difference between these characters and the ones from the 90s shows.
Yeah, he's not the buff guy with the 5 o'clock shadow. He has no shadow. I don't know if he can grow a beard.
I don't think that's in his repertoire. No offense, Grant, I love you, but it was interesting how they showed Barry as a stereotypical millennial. He kind of seems to have not quite grasped a lot of the concepts of, like, adulting, to use that word, like
and
showing up to work on time.
He has a job.
How did he get that job?
We don't know.
But even like Iris still lives at home with her dad, which makes sense in the terms of today's society with student loans being what they are, that we're not quite sure what she was taking out student loans for.
Apparently she got a PhD and she went back to be an undergrad. It's a lot of student loans.
That's interesting. That's a backwards trajectory right there.
I did think that was an interesting way of showing these characters, kind of trying to ground them more into what 20-something, because they're 20-something, Barry's 25 at the beginning of the show, into what today's 20-somethings lives look like.
The bigger question, for me at least, is how old is Cisco? Because he looks like he's all of 12.
I love Cisco. He does. He looks like he's 12 and he wears the shirts and he just has this joie de vivre. He loves what he's doing of being Barry's partner, team member. I don't care if you guys tear apart Iris, but leave Cisco alone. He's so pure. He's the cinnamon roll of the Flash.
That's why. It's like he's so tiny and childish. Like
Dr. Wells did say at one point he recruited early what he thought were going to be illustrious people in the field. I don't know if you saw that episode because I know you skipped around.
Not.
When Felicity came to visit the first time, that's when he mentioned it. Did you see that one?
No, I saw Felicity after she had already come and I was like, who's this girl?
I think he does have a baby face, but I think that also goes into, so does Grant Gustin.
They all have baby faces. And then I just couldn't figure out how they had these jobs.
But I'm not even thinking of their physical appearance. I'm thinking of their behavior and their circumstances. Like you pointed out, Iris lives at home, but it's more than that. She's pretty much the same age as Lois in the original Lois and Clark pilot.
Lois was 26?
Lois was 26, right. 26. She had her own apartment. Her sister was living with her. She was established in her career, which is not out of the question if she started working at the Daily Planet right out of college. The timeline makes sense.
This, however, proves Ashley's millennial point and the current state of the universe for millennials.
Yeah, it goes to show how much things have changed from Gen X to Gen Y.
When I was watching Lois and Clark, my first thought was, what 26-year-old can afford an apartment like that? Give me a break.
With a
on
balcony.
A journalist salary.
But these fantasy lands with apartments for 26-year-olds.
But that's what I'm saying. So when I watched it the first time, I was like, this is not going to happen in reality. And then I stopped and I was like, no, actually, in the 90s, it was very possible for someone to get a good paying job right out of college and be able to put money into housing because they didn't have X amount of thousands of crashing debt to pay off. So I had to keep that separate.
They have avocado toast.
Avocado toast is the best. I will happily forego owning a home if that means I can eat avocado toast. I do understand what you're saying about them being...
And we say this as people who were approximately in kindergarten back in the 90s. So if we're wrong about how simple things seem to have been back then, please let us know at Blue Sock Circle. And you can complain about our penchant for avocado toast while you're at it.
Another thing that I have to say, tying into the age appropriateness of everyone's actions, this is not specific to The Flash. It's specific to CW shows in general. They are not the age that they look. They are all so much older, and it throws me off. I remember when Supernatural premiered back in 2005, and there's a point in the pilot where Dean's talking to Sam, and Dean says, "I'm 26, dude." And I remember thinking, wow, that's so grown up. And then now, on the opposite side of 26, quite a few years on the opposite side of 26, I look at them and I'm like, what have I been doing with my life? Because I have not been slaying demons for, 20 years, or I have not been running around in a forensic lab saving people. It's a very weird CW messes with my mind when I watch the shows.
You have no idea how disappointed I was when I got to high school after Smallville.
You didn't find the boys that look like Clark?
Well, yeah.
There were no Tom Wellings.
Yeah, because the characters that they get to play was the same thing with being One Tree Hill. They were all like in their early 20s.
25-year-old male models compared to real 14-year-old boys.
If you look at their photos of those actors...
Wants 14-year-old male boys.
No, they're the worst, but they gave me such a bad expectation of what high school was going to be. I agree with you. CW TV shows have a lot to answer for. So CW shows aside, is there anything, I know we're in catharsis corner, but is there anything that you guys liked about the show? Maybe to hopefully end on a happy note instead of a dark note?
I found it generally mild and entertaining, so I had fun overall.
I think you picked your episodes very well. I made the mistake of watching the ones in between because I am not someone who can skip from 1, 2, to 4, to 9. I need to watch everything in order. That's just the way I am. And the ones that you did not recommend were non-recommendable.
There was a lot of filler, like you said, the first bit of any TV show, they're trying to find their legs, and they did a lot of leg finding in the first half.
It's an American series, so there's a lot to stretch it over.
Yes.
But yes, my boyfriend also agreed. He looked over your selections and said that these were some of his favorites in this series, and that there is a lot of filler that you could skip over.
I feel so vindicated. Like, if that's a good review for me.
You have nerd cred?
I have nerd cred. I never have nerd cred. It's the best. Was there any ones you particularly didn't like, out of curiosity, of the ones you watched that were not recommended?
Oh, the worst episode for me by far was Flash versus Arrow: Dawn of Testosterone. In general, I dislike what I think of as red case stories wherein superheroes go bad, because what I like about superheroes, or at least the superheroes I do like, is their inherent goodness. But that wasn't so much my issue with this episode as the fact that I didn't know and I didn't care about any of those Arrow characters, but here they were taking over the episode. I love serialized stories, but I hate having to watch 5,000 different franchises just to keep track of the one I'm actually interested in. This is definitely a comic book thing, but it's spread like a virus to all superhero media.
So that's also a thing that has kind of gotten on my nerves, not just with superheroes, but with Star Wars, because with the new series, they keep doing this thing where you not only have to watch the movies, but you've got to read the comics and all the tie-in books in order to know what's going on. It's rampant.
And I get it, you want to sell more stuff. The Marvel movies do it too, obviously, and it has the opposite effect sometimes, because right now what's happening with me in the Marvel movies is that I'm approximately 57 Marvel movies behind because I don't like Thor and I don't like Guardians of the Galaxy. So I never saw the sequels to those movies, and so now I feel I can't watch any of the Avengers movies that come after them, so I can't watch any of the other movies because I'm behind on the Avengers movies. So now I've given up on the entire Marvel universe because I feel like I'm hopelessly lost, and also Peggy is dead and she was the only one I loved, and so I don't care anymore.
Rip Peggy. I mean... She was my favorite.
That's why we had a show.
We had a show. It was canceled too soon. We actually rewatched Captain America on the 4th of July because Captain America, it's a patriotic film. Peggy was the best, and Marvel could make so much money. I know we're talking about Marvel making a lot of money, but if they put out a Peggy Carter fashion line, I would pre-order all the things, and I would wear all the things. So I'd probably have to buy at least 3 copies of each of the things. Peggy is the best.
I want a timeline where Agent Carter's TV show is still on.
I think this is a good moment to have a meme that says, "So you didn't watch all the Marvel movies," using the Captain America.
But anyway, to go back to the CW shows, these shows do it all the time too. And at first it was cute, like the Supergirl Flash crossover I mentioned, where he came to her show and all you needed to know about Barry was that he's really fast and he likes junk food. But then later crossovers, like the ones in this series, they require you to keep up with all the other shows. And like I said with the Marvel movies, I'd rather just give up entirely than watch 15 seasons of Arrow or however long it's been on. The Felicity and Arrow episodes that I saw here, they already expect you to know and to like these characters because they don't do any work whatsoever on this series to tell you who these people are and why you should care. Felicity was just some random blonde woman strolling into Star Labs and being better than everyone at everything all of a sudden without me knowing why, or why I should like her, or why I should ship her with Barry. And apparently this Arrow guy goes around shooting people randomly with arrows, hence the name. But I have no idea why he does that or why we're supposed to root for him regardless because, again, I don't watch that show. That wasn't meant for Flash viewers, it was meant for Arrow viewers. And I guess my conclusion is that I am old and I am grumpy, and in my day we had to walk uphill to the movie theater barefoot in the snow both ways, and our superhero franchises never crossed over and get off my lawn.
I do think Oliver, Arrow, does shoot a lot of people with arrows. I don't think he does it randomly.
There's a purpose?
I think there is a purpose from what I can tell. I totally agree the crossover thing annoys me. I wonder if maybe that's an issue of these TV producers and directors kind of wanting to give Easter eggs and shout outs to like older, more dedicated fans, whether it's of other shows or of the comic books. And in which case, is there a limit to how much you can Easter egg for people before losing new viewers who, yeah, like I knew who Felicity was because I had exposure to her through Arrow. But you're right, if you've never seen it, they don't really do a great job of explaining why she was there. Even a couple lines of exposition maybe would have helped clear up who she is a little bit. So you definitely have a point. Again, I'm just trying to kind of help the writers.
You didn't see that episode, Grisel, did you?
I didn't, no.
For one episode, all of a sudden everyone dropped the Barry should be with Iris act and started on this Barry should be with Felicity act. And that was the whole episode.
I think I saw the episode right after that. Because I did have one episode where they were shipping her and I was like, who's this girl? Why did they want to ship her with him? So.
And it was very weird because Felicity on Arrow is obviously meant to be shipped with Arrow if you watch that. And actually that character was supposed to be a walk-on in one scene. And the actress did so well that they kept her for more of the episode. And then they did so well that now she is an integral part of the show, apparently. So it was kind of weird to me, like rewatching it. I thought it was really just disingenuous because like I said, you obviously meant to ship Barry and Iris. And then if you know anything about Felicity.
But as we know, Barry is a homewrecker. So that's his MO.
Barry knows better than to go up against Arrow, okay? He's not going to homewreck that particular situation. I think he thinks he can take Eddie, and that's why he tries to weasel in that way. Felicity's very smart, so in the defense of women on the show, she got her PhD, and I think she actually earned hers. I know that was a question earlier about Iris and dissertations.
I think I've complained more than enough already. But I have 2 additional personal pet peeves given my background.
Go for it.
One of them is about the dissertation. Again, I can't get over that. How does this woman not have her dissertation anywhere else than on this one laptop? Why isn't it in the cloud? Why doesn't she have 5 USBs in different locations with this dissertation? Why doesn't she have printed out copies at every single place she's ever been to just in case? That was driving me mad. And the second is, and I think this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, real labs don't look like that. I've only been in academic and clinical labs, not police labs or whatever Star Labs is, but anecdotally speaking, real labs tend to be small and crowded because space is at a premium in these types of places. And they're also brightly lit. For some reason, the pseudoscience in these shows doesn't bother me, but I get really annoyed that the labs are always so dark.
That was one of my pet peeves too. Every time that there's a forensic lab in a TV show, it's dark and dingy and dirty, and it's like, what scientist works in a dark, dingy, dirty lab?
But Barry, how is he alone? How does he have an office that big?
How does he have a lab of his own?
I always thought it was because, like, that's not a proper lab. It's like a lab they gave him, like, up in an attic somewhere, is how I read
That's an entire floor.
The set dressing of that piece.
Barry would be in a closet somewhere with 20 other people.
There's a lot of questions about the places that Barry inhabits.
I do want to say, the actress who plays Iris, Candice Patton, she herself wants to have a more fully developed answer to the questions about the thesis. I'll post the interview in our show notes, but they ask her, hey, what's up with that dissertation that got stolen? What are you doing with your academic life? And she was kind of like, I don't know. Hopefully the writers will address this at one point. So she herself realizes that this is a pretty big loophole. The only other thing I would say to play devil's advocate, maybe she was upset not because that was her only copy, but maybe because that was the printed out copy that she was on her way to go turn in to the office. and the office was closing in half an hour, and she didn't have time to run back to her wherever she has the other printed copies and get another one.
That was on her laptop.
I just had a brainwave. And it's probably wrong, and I'm probably giving the show way more credit than it deserves. But what if all the inconsistencies with Iris and what she does? Because Barry keeps going back in time and changing the timeline.
It's Barry's fault. He's messing with the Speed Force. I love it.
I'll take it.
I don't think the writers have thought of this. Just saying. But
that is a perfectly logical explanation within the internal consistency of the show, because Barry messes with the timeline, and God bless him, he never quite gets it right.
Good job, Grisel. You fixed all my problems aside from the dead woman.
Can't fix them all.
On that note, because everyone's a little bit happier with Grisel's amazing brainwave and how she solved not all the problems, but many of the problems, sock ratings time. B, I have a feeling it's going to skew very low, but what are your sock ratings?
I think you'll be surprised. This is difficult because I really like the pilot a lot, but the more I watched the show, the less I liked it. I found it formulaic and predictable, and I had to force myself to keep watching after the first few episodes. It really started feeling like a chore to finish the 9 episodes that you assigned. I think I would have loved it as a kid or as a teen, but at this point in my life, it felt like a rehash of things I've seen several times before, and it didn't really add anything new, and it didn't have characters that I wanted to spend a lot of time with. Plus, I've always hated that WB romantic melodrama that permeated the show. So it started as a 4 for me and ended somewhere at around a 2, with some 1s along the way, but I'll give it a 3 overall.
I am so surprised. I thought it was going to be, if not 0, then maybe perhaps even a negative sock rating.
I also give it a 3 for different reasons. My reasons being that once my boyfriend found out we were watching it, he wanted to get involved and watch a few others. So based on the episodes I saw and his extracurricular episode choices, I just had a good time watching them with him. And I can see this being a show, kind of like, Ashley, you said that you watched this with your brother. It's just a cute show to watch with someone. I think, sitting with somebody on the couch snarking about whatever's going on screen makes it more entertaining than it would be otherwise. Because, otherwise it is just a CW show with a lot of tropey romances and people staring at each other across the room. Pining.
Having watched it again, I think you're definitely right. A lot of why I like it is because I remember watching it with my brother. I still think it's fun. I still think it's light. I still enjoyed watching it when we did. I think it's definitely not a binge-watching show. With all that, I think I too will give it a 3 because it was just an enjoyable thing. So I think we actually
Did we all agree on the sock rating?
We all agreed for once.
I don't care about the reasons behind it. We have an agreeable sock rating.
Oh my God.
And it's on the positive side.
It's the first.
This is a historic occasion.
I feel like we should mark it in some way. I don't know how, but 3's
500 proof shots. Let's go.
Working off the high of that 3 sock rating, where we were all in agreement, let's run right into our reading recommendations. I've only just started this particular rec, but I really think that fans of The Flash would enjoy Steelheart by Bryan Sanderson. It's a YA superhero fantasy, and the book follows David, a young boy who is hell-bent on catching and bringing to justice Steelheart, the man with super strength who killed his father years ago.
I haven't read any Bryan Sanderson, but he's on my list of people to get to, but he's written so much. So eventually one day I'll get to him, and I'll probably read that one too.
I'll finish Steelheart and then tell you whether or not you should start with Steelheart or with Elantris.
Okay. So I have a couple of recommendations. The first one is a viewing recommendation. The 2009 through 2013 BBC series Misfits, which famously has the line, "Save me, Barry!" and a time-traveling character. I won't say more because I'm low-key hoping to cover this on the show one day, but I will say that it is for teen to adult audiences, not in a CW way. It's British. There are no holds barred here. And you can find it on Hulu still. The first 3 seasons were the best in my opinion, and this is one of those shows that has an amazing soundtrack and holds very dear memories for me. I would also recommend the graphic novel Sex Criminals by Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I apologize if I did not. It is about 2 nerds turned vigilante who want to save a library at risk of being demolished, and they stop time when they get squishy and adventure ensues. This is the sort of book I have to hide if the parents are coming over, so keep that in mind. It's rated M all the way.
I do enjoy your euphemisms.
I try.
I have 2 recommendations this time, one in honor of Baby Barry, and another for the adult, or sort of adult, Mr. Allen. The first is a reading recommendation, When You Reach Me by Rebecca Studd, a 2009 science fiction mystery children's novel that won the 2010 Newbery Medal, which is the highest award given to children's literature in the United States. The award is well-deserved. It's a brilliant book. It's difficult to describe without spoiling the experience of reading it, so I'll take a page from Wikipedia, so to speak, and simply say that it's a story about traveling in time to save someone's life, centered around a young girl named Miranda after the Wrights, who was growing up in 1970s New York City. Shenanigans of the time-traveling variety ensue. If you haven't already read A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, do so before reading this book because it's important to the story and also because A Wrinkle in Time is also a brilliant book and everyone should read it. My second recommendation is a viewing recommendation, and it's Grimm, a fun television series about horrific murders that ran from 2011 to 2017. Like The Flash, Grimm's characters work mostly in a police department and face metahumans regularly, except these metahumans are Vessen, which are animal-like creatures we know of from fairy tales and folk tales. The original dark versions, not the Disney ones. Also like The Flash, Grimm has an adorable team supporting the supernaturally gifted protagonist, and his team includes my favorite ship in recent media, Monroe and Rosalie, a reformed big bad wolf who is now a vegetarian, and a cardigan-wearing fox who runs an apothecary. If you like the supernatural crime aspect of The Flash and its lighthearted monster of the week approach to said crime, embedded within a larger mythology centered around dead female guardians, check out Grimm.
This concludes episode 12 of the Bluestocking Circle podcast. For show notes, visit thebluestockingcircle.com. Find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and pretty much everywhere at BlueSockCircle. That's Blue SOX Circle. Or email us at thebluestockingcircle@gmail.com and join the conversation. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. So please rate, review, and subscribe to help us grow.
Cheers! By the way, I think we need to start a trivia team called Pride and Padawans.
Oh, yes, that was so cute.
Done, yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly? Padawans?
Yes, you did.
Padawans.
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 I said it wrong.
No, you said it right.
I said Padawans.
They say it in both ways. It's like Leah.
I say Padawan.